CNN has learned that investigators wiretapped former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort under secret court order.
There's no question that the Obama administration, that there were actions about surveillance and other activities that occurred in the 2016 election. That is a widely reported activity that occurred back then.
We did not include any evidence in our report, and I say our, that's NSA, FBI, and CIA with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had anything, that had any reflection of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that included in our report.
I understand that, but does it exist?
Not to my knowledge.
This is an extraordinary step for the FBI to do surveillance on a high-ranking campaign official. And of course, Manafort is now at the center of the Russia meddling investigation.
Once you get into like 7 o'clock-ish, it becomes Russia o'clock once it's a weeknight.
Chuck Todd then asked, I understand that, but does it exist? You say, no, not to my knowledge. Is that still accurate?
It is.
The president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has been informed by federal prosecutors that they intend to indict him.
This is a joke, right? I'm not being a smartass here, but everybody knows Trump was lying about Obama and the FBI tapping him. Everybody. Does anybody here disagree with that tweet?
It's a good, solid tweet.
Okay, good, solid tweet.
Solid tweet.
There's no evidence of wiretapping.
When we talked about wiretapping, he meant surveillance.
The Senate Intelligence Committee has said they see no indications Trump Tower was the subject of surveillance. That seems to be a pretty blanket statement.
One House Republican now thinks that President Trump should apologize to his predecessor for claiming that former President Barack Obama wiretapped him.
President Obama is owed an apology in that regard because if he didn't do it, we shouldn't be reckless in accusations that he did.
And I'm not going to suggest anybody should apologize.
Don't you think at some point he ought to just say, I apologize, I am just an idiot?
The president was very clear in his tweet that it was, wiretapping.
Time for President Trump to apologize.
Acknowledge that a mistake was made, apologize.
Senator John McCain says if you have something, prove it, and if you don't. So it's not,
Let's be honest, it was pure nonsense, right? There is no evidence that Obama ordered wiretapping or surveillance of the Trump campaign.
Was it some sort of little spurt of activity that you had out of need to have action? I'd like to know where it came from because it's a very serious allegation.
A FISA warrant in October giving counter-surveillance intelligence permission to examine the activities of U.S. persons in Donald Trump's campaign with ties to Russia. The first request, which sources say named Trump, was denied back in June.
Is there any possibility, any way Obama could have tapped Trump Tower in any way?
I don't think there's any evidence at all to substantiate that, and I would not be surprised if Director Comey today basically says as much.
Jim Comey, while he was still director of the FBI, next to Mike Rogers, Admiral Rogers, the head of the NSA, both under oath, told the Senate Intelligence Committee, we know of no wiretaps in Trump Tower.
Right. They tried to discredit the president.
Correct.
The department has no information that supports those tweets.
My view is the same as Director Comey. I've seen nothing on the NSA side that we engaged in any such activity, nor that anyone ever asked us to engage in such activity.
Paul Manafort was the subject of a FISA warrant, which is a secret national security court warrant that allowed the FBI to start listening in on Manafort as of 2014.
There's a report in June 2016, a FISA request by the Obama administration forwarded intelligence surveillance court to monitor communications involving Donald Trump and several other campaign officials. Then they got turned down, then in October. Then they renewed it and do a startup wiretap at Trump Tower with some computer and Russian banks. Bear continues. A June FISA request that foreign intelligence surveillance courts get shot down.
The fact that they were able to get a FISA warrant is a big deal. The fact is that this has to get approval from the highest levels of the Justice Department and the FBI before agents can carry out this type of surveillance. It's considered so intrusive that you almost never find out that these FISA warrants are authorized.
It's unclear if those stem from any of the intelligence that was gathered under the FISA warrant.
This would mean that the intelligence and law enforcement monitored monitoring of these concerning contacts between Trump associates and the Russian government, this intelligence surveillance of these communications and contacts and conversations, this would mean that those intercepts were not things that just happened abroad between foreigners. It included surveillance that happened here in the United States.
And as part of the FISA warrant, we've learned, Aaron, that earlier this year, the FBI conducted a search of a storage facility belonging to Paul Manafort. And as you'll recall, this past July, under Robert Mueller's direction, the FBI raided his home in Virginia.
The president's allegation that he was being, his wires were being tapped, his word, an odd phrase, but it's the terminology he chose, while he was in Trump Tower, are more likely than not to be true. Some of us have been arguing this for a while.
It now sounds like a lot of what they've got about Paul Manafort on the Russia thing is on tape.
Now, how could Jim Comey not know of it if his own FBI had obtained it and it went back to 2014, was dropped for a few months, and then picked up again in 2015 when Donald Trump announced he was running for president?
And that surveillance on him starting in 2014 was obviously totally unrelated to his work on the Trump campaign.
There's no question that there were surveillance techniques used throughout this. I think by a variety of outlets that have reported this activity concluded.
So did he lie under oath?
It's the facts as they came out this morning are inconsistent with what he told the Senate Intelligence Committee.
That also tells you something about how much they already knew about Paul Manafort before Manafort became Trump's campaign chairman. How much they knew about him, his previous work in the former Soviet Union, and his money.
If our own government wants to get us, they will find a way, and they have unlimited resources to attack people who are citizens of the United States and to go after them. And if they can't find what they're looking for, they'll find something that has nothing to do with it. And even if they lose and the citizen wins, they lose because their legal costs have bankrupted them and their reputation is destroyed.
Man, I could not agree with you more, Governor.
And of course, the president had said vocally again and again that he was wiretapped and that he meant that to mean not just phones but all kinds of surveillance. Was he right?
Were you lying, Mr. President? Did you make it up?
Now, the sourcing here is important. Again, CNN is describing 3 sources familiar with the investigation as saying when the FBI was listening in on Manafort, what they heard were communications that sparked concerns.
We're told that there are intercepted communications that raise concerns.
What we do know and what we've been told by sources is that the president and Manafort were still talking early this year, well after the campaign.
Our sources say, and the surveillance was discontinued at some point last year for lack of evidence, according to one of the sources.
There is a couple of ways you can lie. One is outright lying, one is by omission.
The sources say the second warrant was part of the FBI's efforts to investigate ties between Trump campaign associates and suspected Russian operatives. Now, it is unclear when that new warrant started.
Paul Manafort will probably be indicted for something having nothing to do with Donald Trump or the campaign.
If you're Paul Manafort, that's the kind of news that makes you bump into walls and accidentally tie your shoelaces to each other instead of just tying your shoes.
But it is clear that investigators are still very interested.
The Attorney General has taken the position, hands off on anything having to do with this. The more Bob Mueller expands, the less area Jeff Sessions has under his domain.
It's almost hard to watch.